Hello and thanks for joining us on Chicago Tonight. I'm Brandis Friedman. Here's what we're looking at.
I felt like I was back in the South.
Alder people vote whether to censure one of their own. Our Spotlight Politics team breaks down a wild one at City Hall. And Carol Maureen reports on why most paper, including books, are banned from coming into Cook County Jail. Now to some of today's top stories. A full day at City Council where Alder people take a public and emotional apology from one of their own and plans to house migrants, but also made advances on the mayor's $16.6 billion spending plan.
We are supporting our unhoused. We are working to right the wrongs of the past. But these are more than just dollar amounts. They represent a commitment to serving our communities and addressing the socioeconomic disparities that are holding Chicagoans back, and particularly those in the Black community.
After the City Council meeting, the mayor touted the budget's plans to create an Office of Reentry for citizens returning to the community from prison, as well as a subcommittee of restoration and reparations. Spotlight Politics breaks down much more of today's meeting in just a minute. And Chicago voters will soon decide whether to hike taxes on sales of million-dollar homes to fight homelessness.
But this is for the people who, by the definition of hood, they don't consider those people homeless. And that's a shame, and that's a tragedy. Nobody should get up and go to work every day if you live in a shelter or if you're doubled up or tripled up on a couch and not be able to afford rent at the end of the day.
The measure passed City Council by a 32-17 vote. It means Chicago voters get to decide in March whether to raise sales taxes on million-dollar property sales. Advocates say that's expected to generate about $100 million in annual revenue to address the homeless crisis in Chicago through permanent housing and supportive services. Thanksgiving is just over 2 weeks away, and firefighters want you to remember how to fry your turkey.
Do not use water to extinguish an oil fire. I repeat, do not use water to extinguish an oil fire. Never leave the turkey fryer unattended while it's in use. A moment's distraction can lead to a dangerous situation.
The Chicago Fire Department and Illinois Fire Marshal today demonstrated the potential fire hazard of turkey fires, showing how quickly a fire can burst into flames without the right safety precautions. The departments remind family chefs to always use the turkey fryer outdoors on a flat, stable surface, and be sure your bird is fully thawed and dry, and be sure to monitor the oil temperature so it doesn't get too hot. Up next, a controversial tax proposal, the latest in an aldermanic dispute, and a historic trial. Our Spotlight Politics on all that and much more right after this.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by Alexandra and John Nichols, the Jim and Kay Mabey family, the Polk Brothers Foundation, and the support of these donors.
Voters will now decide whether to hike taxes on sales of million-dollar homes to fight homelessness. Plus, a federal appeals court upholds the state's assault weapons ban. And day 2 of jury selection in the trial of former Alderman Ed Burke. Here with all that and more is our Spotlight Politics team, Matt Masterson, Heather Sharon, and Amanda Vinicki. Everybody is someplace different tonight because there's a lot going on. But let's start with City Council. Of course, today the Bring Chicago Home ordinance cleared City Council. Mayor Johnson spoke at a rally before the meeting. Here's some of what he had to say.
We know that almost 70% of those who are unhoused live in communities like mine, in Black communities. Yes. And it is well past time that we prioritize the interests of working people, but especially those who have been harmed the most. So we're not just bringing Chicago home, we're not just raising revenue, we're actually demonstrating how the city of Chicago is leading the way for the rest of the world.
Heather, this is seen as a major victory for Mayor Johnson. How so?
Well, he campaigned on this, Brandis, and he pushed it through the city council when former Mayor Lori Lightfoot refused to. And it was no small feat. There was a lot of opposition, just not on the city council, but also in Chicago's business and real estate community, who are concerned that this real estate transfer tax hike will make revitalizing the Loop and the financial district almost impossible given the shift to remote work and the continuing effect of the COVID-19 pandemic. However, you heard Johnson right there say this is a matter of fairness and equity for the people who the recent boom downtown before COVID left behind, and it's time for those wealthy Chicagoans who account for just 4% of all real estate sales in Chicago to pay a little bit more, and in return, people who sell properties worth less than $1 million will get about a 20% tax cut.
Heather, leading up to the ballot vote, what can Chicagoans expect to hear about it?
Well, it is going to be a fierce fight because the real estate and business community sees like this as an existential threat to their ability to keep bringing in big corporations and big companies to Chicago. However, you will see a enthusiastic and energized progressive community seek to make this a law and set the pace for other cities, including New York, Los Angeles, Philadelphia, who are facing similar crises with homeless people, which has increased significantly in the wake of the pandemic.
So, Amanda, you're in Springfield. The latest revision of the elected school board map just being released. Bring us up to speed on that. Why was there such a delay?
So, Brandis, there's actually several developments, including really any time during this program we could see a vote in the Illinois Senate. I'm not there, I'm in the House chambers right now, but the Senate could take up a proposal for the Chicago elected school board. There is agreement between the chambers on the map itself. What you have now, Brandis, however, is a battle over when exactly people will be elected, because as you may recall, the original law called for 20 districts, and so there would be a sort of a rolling hybrid board where a portion of the board would be appointed by the mayor still, and then the other half would be voted into office for the first time. And so what the question has been is, how are you going to have that half and half? Now we have competing proposals that would sort of wipe the board of that and move to an all-elected school board completely in 2024. The notion had been that you wanted to sort of have this mix for transition's sake, for sort of continuity, build and make things a little more organized. But there has been a lot of consternation over which portion of Chicagoland, which residents would be disenfranchised if they didn't have an opportunity to cast a vote in this historic first 2024 election, moving to an elected school board. So we've yet to see what really the development is. And then, Brandis, as you noted, there is still questions, or at least some criticism over the maps. While it appears that there is a consensus among the leading legislators who are behind the drafting of this plan, community groups, you have, for example, the Little Village Community Organization and Kids First Chicago, who complain that the maps still do not do enough to really bring in the voices, particularly of communities of color. They say that when you look at how the map is divided, there are just too many districts of these 20 where there is a majority of white residents, and that is not fitting in keeping with the population of the pupils who go to CPS, where it is mostly students of color. So that is still up for debate, but appears to be more sort of outside criticism, and that at least we have an agreement on in the Capitol from legislators.
And Amanda, it sounds like they're talking about a pretty decent sized shift from what had previously been the law, with sort of that rolling bringing in of the elected board that you mentioned earlier. But the other thing is, if depending on when this is approved, there's concern about when potential candidates can start to campaign for their new role to be elected to the school board.
Yes, and so the legislature was supposed to really have gotten this done in the spring, and then didn't happen, so they gave themselves an extended deadline. So they have until April to come up with a concrete plan for drawing these districts and figuring it all out. But the advocates, both legislators who are part of this movement, as well as community organizations, say that really this should happen now, sooner than later, because if you're going to run for one of these positions, you've got to get organized. You've got to have conversations with your family, with your supporters, begin fundraising, petition gathering. Petition gathering would start under these proposals in March, so before that deadline to get this all done. So that is why you're seeing these conversations sort of rapidly changing, really literally as we speak, in terms of what the General Assembly is going to do, with hopes of getting it done today, tomorrow, Thursday. These are the last 3 scheduled days of the Illinois General Assembly in the year 2023.
So the pressure is on. Matt, moving over to you, didn't forget about you. So the trial of former Alderman Ed Burke continuing with jury selection today. Yesterday, we reported that the process was going kind of slowly. How'd it go today?
Slow, steadily is probably the right word for it. This is a slow-moving process, but that's partially by design. This is a very high-profile case. It's a very high-profile defendant here in the city of Chicago. There's also 2 men on trial with him, Peter Andrews and Charles Quay. Defense attorneys for all 3 of those men, the feds, the judge, they all want to get a fair jury impaneled so they can have a fair trial in this. It's going to take a long time. There's been more than 30 jurors questioned through the first 2 days. Some of them have already been stricken for various reasons, but the goal is to get up to a group of 47 jurors before they start whittling that back down to get a group of 12 jurors and 4 alternates. So that process is probably going to take a little bit while longer.
Potential jurors were asked about their knowledge and perception of Chicago politics. What did some of them have to say?
Obviously, Burke's role as an alderperson, as head of the finance committee for years and years and years and decades in Chicago, is going to be central to this case. So the parties in this case needed to know if the jurors have any preconceived notions about Burke, about the city council, about politics in general. So most of the jurors had positive things to say about their interactions with alderpersons, with their interactions with Chicago politics overall. Some of them knew who Ed Burke was by name or by reputation, but not any of them really knew much about this case going into jury selection. There was a brief moment of levity today. There was one woman who was questioned as a potential juror. She lives in Bartlett and works as a therapist. She was asked to participate in a quick word association game. The word she was given was Chicago politics. The word she used, first thing that came to her mind, was messy. So obviously, she doesn't live in Chicago. She doesn't follow politics too much, she said, but take that for what it's worth. Kind of describes how things are going to be going in this case.
A lot of us might agree with her.
Right.
Heather, I want to come to you briefly on this. Just give us a sense of the significance of this trial, please.
So it is historic. As I said last night, Brandes, Ed Burke is the last machine boss standing. He is accused of exploiting a system that the feds are going to argue allowed corruption to flourish in Chicago. And we're going to hear a lot about how the sausage gets made at City Hall. And I think that juror was right on. It is a messy process, and the prosecutor's job is to convince the jury that Ed Burke used it to enrich himself.
Okay, so there was also this incident, Heather, last Thursday at City Council involving Alderman Carlos Ramirez Rosa, which led to a lot of fireworks at City Council yesterday, some today. Remind us what happened, please.
Well, there was a special city council meeting on Thursday, and Alderman Carlos Ramirez Rosa did not want that meeting to take place. To make that happen, he had to prevent 26 alderpeople, or half of the city council, from attending. And at one point, Alderman Emma Mitz tried to enter the chamber, and Alderman Ramirez Rosa tried to stop her. And she said that she was left shaken, and she felt like essentially that she was being oppressed. So that created a firestorm of controversy. Alderman Ramirez Rosa apologized on the floor of the city council today after an emotional speech by Alderman Mitz, who described feeling shaken and that she could not continue to represent her West Side ward because she feared she had angered the most powerful person on the city council. Now, Alderman Ramirez Rosa, as I said, apologized, but that wasn't good enough for Alderman Scott Wakesback and nearly half of the city council. They attempted to censure him the first time that I can tell since 1904, but they fell short, with Mayor Brandon Johnson casting an unprecedented tie-breaking vote to spare his former floor leader and close political ally that embarrassment.
Okay, so Heather, as you mentioned, both alderpeople did give statements about this today. Let's hear a little bit of what they had to say.
I felt like I was back in the South. I felt like everything in me was shaking.
I rise to apologize to my colleague, Alderwoman Emma Mitz, to all of my colleagues, to this council, for my actions last week, Thursday. Thursday's special meeting was chaotic, tensions were high. I dramatically overreacted.
There was even a moment where Alderwoman Mitz got up to give Alderman Ramirez Rosa a hug during that apology. Briefly, Heather, before we move on, though, how did Mayor Johnson and other groups respond to those statements?
Well, they sought to sort of start the healing process, and they pointed to Alderman Mitz's decision not to vote to censure Alderman Ramirez Rosa. However, it's clear that this incident has only further exacerbated tension between Black Chicagoans and Latino Chicagoans, which have really been frayed by the debate over how best to care for the nearly 20,000 migrants who have made their way to Chicago.
Amanda, the Invest in Kids program still on the table for a possible extension. What's the status of this? We've heard a lot from groups both in support of it and opposing an extension of this.
Yeah, Brandis, this is the program that gives donors a tax credit for funding scholarships for low-income children to attend private schools. It's really on thin ice, as I noted before, just 3 days left in the legislative session. That program set to end December 31st unless the General Assembly takes action. And while there has been a compromise offered, it does not appear, at least from what I'm hearing, that Democrats are planning to move forward with that. Could still change. There's a wee bit of time, but really time is running very short, and it seems as if Democrats just don't have the appetite to move it forward. A lot of that may be because this program is very steadfastly opposed by a lot in labor, particularly teachers' unions, who are closely allied with the reigning Democratic Party.
Heather, back to you. You asked the mayor about the approval of a lot at 115th and Halstead as a location for the migrant camp. Does this mean that residents there are probably going to see that camp going up soon?
It does, and it could go up very quickly from what we've been told by Johnson's administrations in terms of erecting the base camp. This vote today, which was nearly unanimous, came after Alderman Ronnie Mosley dropped his opposition because the approval of the plan includes expedited approval for a redevelopment of this nearly 70,000 square foot building and 6.5 acre lot. It is slated to become a mixed-use development with apartments and shops and a new park. He says that it's worth having a migrant base camp on this property for the next year if it speeds that redevelopment, and that was the compromise approved today by the City Council. A bright spot, along with the approval of the Bring Chicago Home proposal for the mayor on what was a very difficult day for most of his allies.
And Matt, before we let all of you go, you'll be back on the Burke beat for a little while longer. When do they expect to have a jury selected there? What's next? The
initial hope was to get opening statements tomorrow. That's looking very unlikely. There's a lot of heavy lifting left to be done. So the judge today said she expects a jury to be in place hopefully by Thursday. Court is not going to be in session on Friday for Veterans Day. So opening statements could either be late Thursday or potentially we might have to wait until next week.
Okay, more to come from everybody. Team coverage from Heather Sharon, Amanda Vinicky, and Matt Masterson. Thanks, everybody. Up next, why most paper is banned from coming into Cook County Jail. Carol Maureen with that story right after this. In a sweeping move to address what officials see as a rising health concern within Cook County Jail, authorities have imposed heavy restrictions on external paper products entering the facility. It comes in the wake of a number of fatal overdoses linked to drug-soaked paper. Carol Marine and students from the DePaul Center for Journalism Integrity and Excellence have been investigating, and Carol joins us now. Carol, welcome back.
Thank you, Brandis. The overdoses are linked to synthetic cannabinoids. They are lab-made drugs that can be laced, and this will surprise you, with rat and roach poison to enhance the high. Justin Wilkes, the executive director of intelligence at the jail, calls this an urgent situation.
It's the age-old problem, right? That trying to get stuff into the jail, prisons. So this is just the newest thing.
The newest thing is drug-soaked paper, and these are examples jail officials confiscated.
Inside the cell, you'll see papers that are saturated like this. So the wrinkle, the discoloration, and the different shades.
This discoloration happens when the papers are soaked with synthetic cannabinoids, also referred to as K2 or spice, a lab-made substitute for cannabis that, according to officials, is rising in popularity among Cook County's jail detainees.
So we've had 17 individuals in custody indicted this year for saturated papers.
According to autopsies we reviewed, 3 detainees have died in the last year inside the jail from synthetic cannabinoid use. In the case of Thomas Diskin, a 57-year-old white male, the medical examiner's report revealed authorities found 2 partially burnt pieces of toilet paper used as ignition tools, adding he was found unresponsive in respiratory distress.
People will start nodding off a little bit, and because it causes so much of your blood pressure to go up, you can see the effects of it in the brain, where your brain just kind of starts to bleed out.
Dr. Priscilla Ware is the Director of Correctional Health. Why is roach spray or rat poison being used with drugs?
I wish I had that $1 million answer to that, but people are smoking it to, I guess, get the effects of what it can give to you. However, these are very dangerous things.
At the sprawling Cook County Jail, approximately 5,000 detainees wait for their day in court. In a small, windowless room, staff go through all arriving mail, checking for anything that seems suspicious. It does feel thicker. They sniff, they hold letters up to the light, and they sort.
How are you supposed to teach if you can't bring in paper? That can't be true.
DePaul University professor Mindy Kalchman teaches a math program at the jail. She says planning and executing classes can be difficult. All papers she brings in must be pre-screened days in advance. Last-minute class notes she often scrawls on her arm. At the end of the day, do you think classes would be better if you didn't have these strictures?
Yes. I think that I think I could be more spontaneous. I think the students could be more spontaneous.
On Halloween, a small group gathered outside the criminal courts building to protest the new restrictions. They claim books they sent to detainees have been unfairly rejected. However, restrictions on legal documents were lifted in September after defense attorneys protested. Have you had enough time to judge if what you put in place is having an impact? Jane Goopser, the executive in charge of the jail, says it's too soon to tell if the paper restrictions have worked. She estimates that 60% of detainees have some sort of addiction problem. Of the jail's $378 million operating budget, about $3 million goes to help staff programs that deal with mental illness and drug addiction, both of which were problems for Thomas Diskin. In the autopsy, the medical examiner noted the synthetic cannabinoids can cause euphoria, relaxation, altered perception of time, but they can also be lethal.
But a lot of people in jail are not necessarily using drugs because they're addicted to drugs. They're using drugs because they're in a terrible situation and they want to not think about what's going on or get a little bit of relief.
Smuggling contraband into almost any jail is hardly a new story, but Cook County officials say the deadly consequences require tougher restrictions as they try, with some results, to help those who want to help themselves.
We recently hired someone who's specifically a recovery support specialist. So every time I get notification of someone to be suspected under the influence, she goes and meets with them and talks to them about AA or NA or whether or not they're interested in recovery. And I'd say about 50% of the people she talks to say, yeah, I think I actually need to talk to someone.
In the autopsies our DePaul students revealed, there were overdose deaths by fentanyl, but it was synthetic cannabinoids that sparked the most recent restrictions, Brandis.
Carol, is this a statewide issue?
Not so much. The numbers say no. Back a number of years ago, there were 150 deaths in 2018 linked to the cannabinoids, but most recently, in the last 3 years, only 3, and those 3 were at the jail.
Okay, fascinating reporting as usual from you and your students. Carol Maureen, thanks so much.
Thank you.
And that is our show for this Tuesday night. Don't forget to stay connected with us by signing up for our daily briefing. And you can get Chicago Tonight streamed on Facebook, YouTube, and our website, WTTW.com/news. You can also get the show via podcast and the PBS video app. And join us tomorrow night at 5:30 and 10. How Chicagoans are coming together to put food on the table ahead of the holiday season. And you might know him as the Grandy Man. We show you how a 3-time MLB All-Star is giving back to area kids. Now, for all of us here at Chicago Tonight, I'm Brandis Friedman. Thank you for watching. Stay healthy and safe, and have a good night.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, a Chicago personal injury and wrongful death firm that is proud to give back to its community in Chicago and beyond.